Back in high school, either in 9th or 10th grade, my life was affected drastically. Working at Wendy's had me coming home at midnight, even during school nights. My parents didn't like that much, but money was on my mind. I was driving an old '69 Camaro, so my money was being dumped into fixing it up, and smoking pot, as well as selling here and there. I wasn't necessarily the perfect child that I portrayed in my small town in Texas. I mean, I wasn't getting arrested, but I was a little mischievous. I wasn't necessarily heading down the right path. Since I worked late hours, and I came and went as I pleased, I told my parents I was working late and I should be home around midnight. I went into work at 5 and got off at 9, then headed to my girlfriend's house, which was a town over. When I arrived at her house, I killed the engine and I walked up to her house to ring the doorbell. Before I begin with the unusual situation, let me explain two important big details. My '69 Camaro had issues, like any other classic, but mine was loud. It had a 350 short block with an Edelbrock exhaust, bad brakes, a heavy full metal body that creaked, and drove with bad handling. The second important detail is, Tina, my girlfriend, lived on a long stretch of road surrounded by huge pecan and oak trees that kept her house and street covered in darkness, even during the day. She comes to the door and tells me that we have to hang out in the front yard on the patio, but instead, we headed to my car and light up. Her parents were usually asleep by then, so after smoking and grubbing on some food I stole from work, we chatted up and began fooling around. By then it was 11, so I knew I would have to be leaving soon. I walk around to the rear of the car to open her door, which is difficult to open because it's usually jammed, when I noticed an eerie stillness. While being freaked out and fighting with the passenger handle, I look towards the neighbor's mailbox. I then hear whistling. I could feel that someone was watching me. Tina manages to force the door open by kicking it, hitting me in the stomach, and notices me looking over and searching for the whistling. She heard it too. She freaked out and started crying. The neighbor's huge tree began shaking. Branches began to crack and drop from above. I tell her to jump back in the car, and I too run to the front of the car to get back in. As I slammed my door shut, I looked over at Tina, and she was gone. She hightailed it back to her front door. I could see her face, and it freaked me out when she began pointing at her neighbor's tree from her window. Being slightly in a daze, I look in my rearview mirror instead of putting the keys in the ignition. I noticed leaves were falling all around my car. Oddly, there was no wind and no other trees that were swaying, only the ones near my car. I start my car and look towards Tina at the window again. Now she was jumping and I guess screaming, so I throw it in a drive and go, but wanted to know what I was experiencing, so I stopped a couple of houses down. Again, I looked back in my rearview mirror, but this time I saw two glowing eyes, huge orange-red eyes. In my mind, I was thinking it's an owl, but then noticed my brake lights lit up behind me, capturing an outline of a mammoth creature. I now could see what it was, like it was saying, "Notice me." This was no owl. I hit the gas down the long stretched road and focused on my mirrors. This creature was following me. This thing was causing so much destruction in those trees. It followed me flying tree to tree, knocking more tree limbs down to the road. It was like I was in a trance. I couldn't keep my eyes off of her. Yes, her. This thing was a her, with wings like a bird, but bony in a sense that you could see the bone structure like a bat, and a normal-sized female figure, but with long claws where her feet should be. The wingspan was no less than 10 feet in length. The body looked like dark skin, but had no clothing, and shoulder-length hair with huge piercing eyes. I can't describe the face in detail. It was like in the dramatic movies where you see the character's eyes, and the rest of the face is drowned in shadow. I finally hit Interstate 35, but couldn't see it anymore. There were too many other cars around. After running several lights and missing a couple of stop signs, I pulled up to my driveway. I kicked the door. I'm not even sure I turned the car off, and ran inside straight to my room. "You're finally home?" I hear from my parents' room, but I just slammed the door and killed the lights in my bedroom. I was safe indoors where no one could see or hurt me. I laid in bed shaking, trying to figure out what just happened. Then something hits my window. Thinking it was my dog Killer, I turn my lights on and I look outside. Then I remember he was inside of his crate. We had a tall crepe myrtle right outside my bedroom window facing the backyard. I put two and two together and killed the lights again, wishing I had curtains or even blinds. I hid right up against the wall next to the window. This thing had followed me all the way home and was outside of my window, perched in a tree. I was trying to yell for my parents, but didn't want to give away my location to this thing. Then this high-pitched whistle/scream comes out and something hit my window and is scratching the window pane. It sounded like razors being used to scrape against it. The scraping continued until my mother burst in yelling, "What the hell are you doing whistling?" At this point, I was balled up crying against the wall. I remember later, she said I appeared as if I had lost all color, almost white, and I'm Latino. So I explained the night, what happened and what I had witnessed. She tacked up an old bedsheet over the window. Half an hour later, my grandmother walks in and she asks what I saw. Growing up, all of us grandkids were told crazy stories by our mothers and grandmothers. We thought they were to keep us scared and in line. I explained once more, and she cried along with my mother. She told me that this thing was a witch, half bird and half lady, and they called her Lechuza a bruja, and apparently it would watch for bad souls and abduct you by whistling at night. Once I was calm, she performed some Mexican ritual on me and spent several minutes praying over me, and finally, I felt somewhat at ease. "Now you act right and be respectful, stupid," my grandma yells. The next day, my mother had a crew come and remove the tree and bought new blinds and thick dark curtains. This was the last day that I would act like a fool. I'm now 36 years old, married, not to Tina, have a small family, and my parents moved from that location and are now building their new home on my land. Life is great besides a couple of odd things that have happened throughout the years, but nothing compared to Lechuza. This was real, and they weren't just stories. I have heard many stories about skinwalkers and various other mythical creatures, so I thought I would share a story of something that is commonly known in southern states as La Lechuza. From what I have heard, they are in southern Texas, New Mexico, and northern Mexico, but they could be at other locations. I know that they are supposed to be witches disguised as owls, except for the fact that they are freakishly large, and are obviously not owls because they have human faces. A little bit of a backstory before I provide my personal story. We have all heard the tales growing up, but no one ever believes it. From what I know, they only come out at night and when you are alone or in a small group, mainly when you are the most vulnerable. They are said to hum in an almost humanly way, almost like a whistle. It's a truly creepy sounding hum, and you must never mock it in any way. In the stories, they come as omens of death or curses, or they're simply trying to kidnap kids. Now on to the story. This all happened back in 2003, when I was approximately 16. My name is Jessica, and I was extremely petite at the time, weighing 95 pounds soaking wet. I lived in a small city in West Texas. I was dropping off my friend David at his house in a relatively small suburban community. David was about 5'6" and weighed about 125 pounds. We were about the same age, and neither of us could really fight anything off if we were attacked. David's neighborhood wasn't necessarily in the middle of nowhere. It was actually right by the college, but it was very dimly lit, almost completely pitch black. It was approximately 11 o'clock at night. I was in the driver's seat saying my goodbyes and laughing at some stupid joke David had made, when in my rearview mirror, out of my peripheral vision, I saw something white go by. It went by so quickly, and it was so dimly lit outside, that I thought I might have imagined it. So when I turned around to look and see if anything was behind the car, and saw nothing, I figured it was just my imagination. I turned to face David, and he, of course, was looking at me in a confused way, almost like he was asking, "What's wrong?" I was about to tell him I thought I saw something, when we both saw something shoot by the front of the vehicle just as quickly. Now we're both sitting there with confused looks on our faces, wondering what the hell we just saw. A possible Lechuza sighting hadn't even crossed my mind. I was still trying to process what was going on when we both heard the distant whistling of a human that was slightly distorted. It was coming from the front of the car off in the distance. Then we heard another one coming from behind the car, and one to the left of the car, and one to the right of the car, all out of eyesight. I quickly looked around to see if I could find anything that was making that noise, and I saw what looked like a statue on one of the roofs of a house that was 2 houses down from our location. Confused, I turned to David and asked if his neighbor had a note on his roof. He looked at me confused and answered no. We both looked at this strange creature that was just chilling on his neighbor's roof. Then we started to notice its features. It had to be about 4 feet tall. There was no way it was any smaller. It was right next to the chimney, and it was almost the same height. It looked like a damn bird, but it was too dark to tell what kind of bird. And even at the distance we were, it was obvious it had an orange-red set of glowing eyes. We were obviously freaked out by the sight of this thing, especially when a vehicle drove by and we saw this damn thing move a few feet over to avoid getting hit by the headlights. And as soon as the car had passed, actually stepped back to its original spot. That was the last straw. I peeled out, and David was stuck in my car until I felt safe. We drove around for an hour hoping that things would leave. I went back to his house, but this time I dropped him off in the alley behind his house. We weren't sure if those things had left, so he ran inside and sent me a message letting me know he was safe. It's not like we could have called the police and reported a giant bird on people's houses, or called anyone for help. Who would believe us? We knew what it was, because I had heard the legends, and while we were driving around for that hour, I had relayed information to David, who was confused and freaked out. I drove home and hoped that was the last of it, but of course, it never is. Later on at school, David had informed us that all night he had heard the scratches on his windows and light tapping noises. This seemed to be the only time he heard them, but I told him to be careful just in case they came back. My friends and relatives have encountered these Lechuzas as well. I do know for certain what I saw, and birds aren't supposed to be that damn big, and they sure as hell aren't supposed to have glowing eyes. I didn't drink or do drugs, and neither did David, so we were both sober and clear-minded. I know too many people that have seen these things, so something's going on, and if you just Google it, you can read more stories. My name is Aaron, and this story is told from my grandma's perspective. This happened right after my grandma had bought the house that she currently lives in. She was so excited, and to celebrate, she invited her boyfriend and a couple who were good friends. I can't remember the woman's name, but it was something along the lines of Kathy, so I'll call her that. My grandma, Carol, and Kathy went downstairs to put up curtains, while the guys went out to buy champagne for the celebration. Let me give you the layout of the house. When you walk in the front door, you're essentially on the second floor, because the house was built on a hill. The bottom floor is the den where they were putting up the curtains on the living room, which faced her pool. On the third floor is where the bedrooms are, and the fourth is where the game room and 2 balconies are, one facing the front and one facing the back. It was around 8 p.m. when the guys left, and my grandma and Kathy were in the den on the first floor. They were going through old movie boxes when Kathy walked over to my grandma and put her hand on her shoulder and asked her if she was crying. When my grandma looked up at her, Kathy was confused because my grandma clearly was not crying. She replied, "No, what the hell?" And they laughed. Kathy was left with a look of confusion and stopped and looked around. My grandma was about to ask her why, but Kathy shushed her. They both listened, and she said it sounded like a faint crying, but also a low, wretched screaming, which, if you ask me, just imagining it sounds terrifying. They made their way upstairs to the kitchen on the second floor and listened. She said it was even fainter, like they were closer to it when they were in the den. They soon figured out it was coming from the backyard. My grandma, being a police officer, honestly isn't scared of anything. She decided she wanted to go out on the porch and see if she could make out the sound. Kathy was freaking out and held on to my grandma like you would a friend while walking through a haunted house. Kathy whined, "Carol, you don't know what's out there. Just wait till the boys get back. They can deal with whatever it is. It sounds ugly." My grandma laughed and said, "I'm not waiting for anybody. I can handle myself." She proceeded to open the back door to the porch. She walked out, and it was dark other than the pool light. She looked to her right and slowly scanned the areas, turning her head to the left. Then she saw something odd. There was a big black thing at the bottom of the stairs on the railing which leads to the pool. She walked out farther to see what it was. She said the noise got louder, crying, growling, and screaming all at once. And then it stopped. The thing slowly turned its huge head to reveal what looked like a woman with long black hair, but morphed with an owl. She said it was so big she couldn't believe the railing was holding it up. What shocked me was that she said when she was staring at it, and it stared back, she was not afraid, but more curious as to why it was on her property. She wasn't mad either, just pure curiosity. She heard Kathy bolt back inside. My grandma stood her ground and just stared at this creature. She said it didn't look angry or even have a menacing stare. It looked sad, but at the same time almost emotionless. Then she said the owl lady slowly turned its head back to its original position and spread its enormous wings, about the length of a car, and flew away into the night. She also said that she couldn't hear its wings when it flew, which was all the more curious to me. I wondered why this Lechuza was there. My grandma later told me she used to be what is called a white witch and practice witchcraft, and that it's said that people who do these things have a sort of guardian. Not an angel, but creatures, like the one she saw. She said she guessed that's why it was there. She also told me she had seen it 2 more times after that. Once before her son passed away, my father, and another when a close friend also passed. I find it scary, yet interesting. I grew up in Berkshire County, a rather rural area in western Massachusetts. There are stretches of road that are surrounded by, quite literally, tens of miles of forest. At this time, I lived on the edge of a very, very large forest. Bears, coyotes, fisher cats, you name it, I've seen it slithering beyond those trees. It's an area where you leave your car and look behind you, only to see pairs of green eyes staring at you from the edge of the forest. I can't tell you how many times I've had that hair standing up on the back of your neck feeling. It's eerie, but you become used to the fact that you live in their territory, not the other way around. One night a few summers back, I was driving back from a friend's house between 1 and 2 a.m. She lives in the middle of nowhere, with miles between houses. I took my usual route, one that takes me beneath a canopy of trees that lasts for about 3/4 of a mile. Even during the day, this part of the road is very dark due to how densely packed these trees are. At night, it was pitch black. I've never had any issues driving back at night from her house, save for a few times a skunk or a raccoon has scurried across the road. A 1/4 mile into the canopy, I saw something that looked off. I got a weird vibe from it. Not necessarily a run gut feeling, but the feeling you get when your brain is struggling to process something is just way beyond its pay grade. At first I justified what I was looking at, and thought it looked weird because it was dark out, and it was just a deer facing away from me at a peculiar angle. I guess reality gave me a swift kick to the head when I realized I was looking at a very large coyote standing on its hind legs, hunched over slightly, looking at me. Not at the car, not at the headlights, but right at me. Standing, this thing was easily 6 or 7 feet tall. It looked very off. Not because of the posture or because of the height, which certainly added to the weirdness factor, but because its face looked very humanoid. Like it had facial expressions you'd recognize in humans, not in dogs, and certainly not in giant coyotes. I swear, I have absolutely no idea what came over me in this instance, but I took my foot off the gas. I was going about 40 miles per hour, almost like this thing had caught me in a trance. Like my brain shut off because it was way too much, and I was beyond overwhelmed with seeing something that didn't make sense to me. It still doesn't. I slowed down as I got really close to the thing, dangerously so. And, mind you, it was standing probably 5 feet, at the very most, from the side of the road, and maybe 6 feet from my car. So going slow was not a good idea, because it easily could have just jumped out at me and my rolled down passenger window. But here I was, slowly crawling up to this thing like I was about to ask it if it needed a lift. I think I was about 6 feet away from it before my brain finally kicked back on like Windows 95 rebooting, and everything blinked back into existence. My foot slammed that gas pedal. My tires were spinning out for a second and my car lurched forward and took off like a bullet. My heart was pounding out of my chest, and I had no idea if I was holding my breath the whole time because I was suddenly gasping for air. The air was oddly charged. It smelled musty and metallic and had a weird staticky feeling to it all at once. I never once felt that sensation since that night. I looked back once after my car had sped forward to make sure it wasn't following me, but it stayed standing there, somewhat lit up by the red glow of my taillights, and it was still looking at me. This time the humanoid face didn't look very human anymore, and instead looked very much like a coyote. For a minute, I was strongly questioning my own sense of reality, if I had really seen what I thought I had seen, but it stood there, frighteningly tall and still remained on its hind legs. I've read somewhere, and don't ask where, that Wendigos or skinwalkers can show that they're not animals, not human either, when they're going to take someone. Maybe to instill fear. Maybe because they know others will have the same reaction I did when their brain fails to process and their body freezes up, struggling to truly understand what it just isn't meant to. I don't really know what I saw that night. I just know that I didn't see a normal coyote, and I didn't see a weird furry guy dressed in faux fur standing on the side of the road past midnight in rural Massachusetts. Not that they wouldn't. I don't know what they're about. I've seen a lot of shit, weird shit, in the woods surrounding my town. I've experienced paranormal things. Not, ooh, ah, spooky ghost type of stuff. But there are things that exist deep in the woods where people don't go that are beyond human comprehension. There are strange things that live out there, and I just happened to see something. Not saying that I know what, but I saw something that didn't make sense. Something abnormal. Something that scared me. Every single year, my family and I would go to our bach located in literally the middle of nowhere, completely 100% isolated. To get to the location, we first have to drive 4.5 hours north into the country. Then there is a 25-mile gravel road in which takes you past different forest areas, abandoned century-old farmhouses, and bare untouched land. The area in which the bach is located used to be a part of a bustling town in the mid-1700s, full of fish and dairy factories, a school, hotel, and other things before it was abandoned in the early 1900s. The town had a dark history. Firstly, a bunch of school kids playing on the main wharf drowned because the rotten bridge had collapsed under them. Secondly, the daughter of the hotel owner suffered serious mental health issues and drowned her infant baby brother before she hung herself. Lastly, a 17-year-old male, we'll call him John, also suffered from an array of mental health disabilities, including severe schizophrenia and bipolar. John's poor mental health had apparently resulted in him persuading a dozen local children to come and play on the beach, where he had said a bonfire had been set up. He then proceeded to shoot 11 children and beat the final child to death by bashing his head in with a piece of driftwood. There are people who dismiss this event as bullshit, and there isn't much historical evidence or records on it, but many people believe it is very true, and after me and my family experienced what we did, we believe it to be authentic. My grandfather first bought the property to store his boat, but we started camping down there, which resulted in turning the boat shed into a bach and a yearly tradition. He was unaware of the history up until 10 years after he bought the property. Knowing this history didn't really seem to affect us. We still enjoyed going there every year. It was 2013. My family and I were there for our yearly exclusion from civilization, enjoying the summer, good food, and just spending time with each other. Before I go any further, I'd like to say that I've been going to this place ever since I was born, because it's been in my family for 40 years. I'm now 19. It was our final night there, and we were all in the main living room area telling scary stories and reminiscing of old times spent there. At about 2:30 a.m., I awoke to the sound of feet running in the sand outside of the batch. The batch is literally on the beach, so much so that when the tide comes in, the water is practically under the batch, so all you can hear is the gentle waves and sounds from the country night. It sounded like someone was running up and down on our batch. I first thought it was my father coming back from floundering, but soon realized he was sleeping in the bunk to the left of me. I just sat there listening for about 2 minutes before I awoke my dad to listen with me. As I woke my dad, the sound of the running stopped. I told my dad about it, and he said it must have just been some kind of animal. I fell asleep after about 10 minutes, only to be awoken 30 minutes later by the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. It sounded like a lot of deep inhuman growls coming from underneath the batch. The growls awoke my whole family, so we sat up and listened until they stopped. I'll never forget my dad's face. He looked so terrified, which is unusual because he's so bloody macho. We would usually go get him to inspect something like this, but we didn't want anyone leaving. About several minutes passed before the growling came to a complete stop. We sat there in shock trying to figure out what it was, even though I knew it wasn't anything remotely human. I would like to also add, up until this point I didn't believe in the paranormal. We dismissed it as some kind of animal, and all eventually fell back to sleep. But I was awoken again about an hour later with the feeling that someone or something was staring at me. It's hard to explain, but it felt like this immense thick energy in my surroundings. I remember being all sweaty because I had my head in my sleeping bag in 80-degree heat, refusing to look around me. This lasted for about 10 minutes before the curiosity got the better of me, and I just looked around the room. I put my head up, and what I saw will never leave my mind. Makes me ill just thinking of it. Near the back door of the batch there is a large window located next to it, which overlooks a small deck. There was a large, hooded black figure, very still, just standing there. I couldn't see a face, just the outline of what looked like something, or someone, draped in black clothing. It would have had to have been at least 6'7" to 7 foot tall to reach the high position it was in. I felt paralyzed, and just stared back at it for at least 2 minutes, before a loud, deep growl came from the direction of the figure. It woke my family, so I jumped up out of my sleeping bag, and while I wasn't looking at it, it disappeared. I gathered myself almost in tears from fear to tell my family what I had just seen. We didn't go back to sleep because of what we had witnessed, and because I was in a shocking state from my anxiety. The next day my uncle came to visit. I told him what happened the night before, and he revealed something that still fucks me up to this day. He said that the land the batch was built on belonged to the mother of John. She had apparently had several satanic rituals in her home, and had severely abused John, which had probably resulted in his mental health issues. My uncle said he knew this because his friend, who was a priest near the old town, had relatives who passed down this information. He said he didn't believe it, so he didn't bother to mention it to any of us, fearing it would make us not want to visit anymore. But I can say confidently that we now see it as the truth. Thankfully, my uncle got his friend, the priest, to bless the property short after. I don't know why any paranormal activity just occurred that one time, when it could have happened during the 40 years my family had been going there. Also, despite that emotionally scarring event, we still visit every year. The days there are beautiful in the summer, but in the evenings I am always hoping and praying that me or my family doesn't experience anything similar to that event. I was about 13 when these events took place. My family and I were living in a 2-bedroom duplex. My parents had the master bedroom, and my sister Angela had the second bedroom, which left me with the laundry room. Though I didn't mind. It was spacious and led to the backyard. My sister and I were homeschooled while my parents worked long shifts during the day, so she and I were the only ones in the house. Nothing out of the ordinary happened until our second year living there. My bedroom didn't have a door, but it had a curtain to separate it from the living room. One morning while walking out of the bathroom, I saw what appeared to be the lower half of a man with dark work boots and a long trench coat walking straight through my room. It didn't appear to be ghostly. It was tangible. The curtains swayed as he walked through them. My first thought was, maybe Dad's home early, so I called out to him. No response. An ominous feeling came over me. I ran past the curtain, expecting to see an intruder before he exited into the backyard, but no one was there. I checked the door leading to the backyard, and it was locked. It was at that moment that I asked myself, did I just see a ghost? I decided to keep it to myself since I didn't think anyone would believe me if I told them. Plus, my sister is a big baby, and I didn't want to freak her out. The following evening, after my parents came home from work, I ran into my father in the hallway. His usually tan face was white as a sheet. I had never seen this look on his face before. He then ran quickly straight into my bedroom, pushing aside the curtains in his way. He opened the back door and checked the entire backyard. After not finding anyone, he came back inside with a pissed-off look on his face. I asked him what was wrong, and what he said next chilled me to the bone. He described the exact same thing I saw the day before. A man, brown boots, curtains moving. It was the same. I told him what I saw and assured him that he wasn't crazy. He and I nervously laughed it off, but little did we know that this was just the beginning of our nightmare. This next incident is quite disturbing. I am unaware of what time I woke up, but I know it was late into the night. I woke up from a deep sleep, which was rare for me because I never get good sleep as an insomniac. With a pissed off mindset, I rolled my eyes across the room and noticed something unusual. She was standing in the corner, staring straight at me. She looked to be about 12, with long hair and a plain dress. I know my eyes were not playing tricks on me, because the moonlight from the backyard illuminated through my room. I thought to myself, fuck this, and put my arm over my eyes, trying to force myself back to sleep. A few seconds later, my bed shook. I hesitantly peeked out from under my arm to see her face hovering right above mine. Her features were not defined, but I couldn't miss those wide eyes. It's true what they say, that your body freezes in the midst of terror. It took all of my energy just to turn away. I brought the covers up to my head and begged God to let me fall asleep. Eventually, I did. I told my family what I experienced that night, and to my surprise, they all believed me. This next incident was by far the most traumatic. I had just said goodnight to my family, and we all went to bed. I faced the wall with my eyes closed and began my nightly prayers until I was interrupted. My bed shook a little. I felt a weight as if someone was laying on me. I knew that I shouldn't open my eyes, but I stupidly did. This person, or thing, is hard to describe. I think it was a male, but I can't tell. It had no clothes. Its skin looked shredded and burned to hell. And its face. Oh God, its face. It didn't have human features. No nose, black eyes, and it smiled from ear to ear. Its skin was horribly disfigured all over its body, which makes its face hard to describe. I stared right at it and continued to pray, when it raised its gangly finger to its lips and let out a long. My heart dropped to my stomach. It tried to keep me from praying. I shut my eyes and said out loud, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus." A sense of comfort washed over me, but I decided to keep my eyes shut tight. I fell asleep and awoke the next morning thankful that the night was over. I told my youth pastor a few days later about those experiences, and he decided it was best to anoint me with oil and pray for these occurrences to stop. To this day, I have not experienced anything else like that. I can't help but think of how strange it was that everything happened in that bedroom. I'm a skeptic, and I've never believed that houses could be haunted, but it makes me wonder if that one was. My name is Lewis, and I'm from a small town in South Texas. When I was 10 years old, my family and I moved out of the countryside and into a house in town. The house was big and full of room to play in, but from the very beginning we all had an eerie vibe from that small hallway leading to the other side of the house. As I was growing up, we would have family gatherings, and during these times my aunts, uncles, and cousins would all say that they would get the same feeling when they walked through the hallway, with most saying they could feel the hair on the back of their neck stand up as they passed through. I don't remember when it started, but my immediate family began to see a shadowy figure in the corner of the hallway where the wall turned right to the restroom in another bedroom. Years later, I read up on shadow people, and we basically have the same old story, seeing the figure from the corner of our eyes and the figure ducking behind the wall when we turned to face it. The figure in the hallway had the height of an adult, and we would always see just half of its body as it leaned out to stare at whoever was in the living room. A few other strange things would happen around that time, such as the story my brother later told us of the time his girlfriend came over. After a while of hanging out in his room, he went to the kitchen to get some drinks. As she laid on her stomach on the bed, she said she felt someone grab her leg. She automatically thought it was my brother and laughed as she turned to say his name and tell him to cut it out. She turned to see only an empty room and find that my brother was still in the kitchen. During my college years, my girlfriend and I would come and visit my parents' house, but I was so busy with school and life that I totally forgot about the shadows and hallway creepiness. I never thought to bring it up to my girlfriend either. Fast forward a couple of years. I am now married to that same girl, and we have 2 amazing sons. On a side note, I am newly subscribed to a lot of horror channels, so one night my family and I are watching funny cat videos on YouTube when we get a suggested video and the topic is shadow people. I suddenly remember the shadow man from my parents and tell the story to my wife. She said, "I know. When we go to visit your mom, I would see it all the time." I said, "Really? The tall shadow in the hallway?" To which she replied, "No, the small one in the kitchen." This totally freaked me out. I later drew a rough sketch of the kitchen and asked her to pinpoint where she would see it. She pointed to the bar area between the kitchen and the dining room, so I drew in a small shadow person and showed it to her. She said that that's exactly how she saw it, that it looked more like a child in height and build. A few days later, I called my mom and told her about what my wife said. I asked her if my mom and dad still saw the shadow man in the hallway. She said, "Oh yeah, we still see it, and sometimes we hear things from the hallway at night when we're trying to sleep." She said that most nights she sleeps with the television on, so she doesn't have to hear the strange noises. She says that the only time she sleeps with the TV off is when she is very tired and knows she will go to sleep soon after laying in bed. She said one night she was dead tired, so she didn't think she needed to turn the TV on and was fast asleep next to my dad. My dad chimed in at this time to add to the story. He said that that night they were fast asleep when he heard someone running really fast down the hallway and into their bedroom. He said as soon as the footsteps made it to the bedroom, there was a loud thump as if whoever was running slid and fell on the floor. Both of my parents jumped out of bed from the sound of the commotion, and my dad turned on the lights in the living room to find nothing. They can't explain it, and now they sleep with the television on every night. A quick update. Since writing this story, a new event has happened. It was the evening after Thanksgiving. My wife and I were cleaning the kitchen, and my sons were running around the house with their remote control cars. At one point, my oldest son approached me and said, "Dad, there's someone in the restroom." I asked him what he meant. He said, "Every time I pass by the restroom, I see a shadow." My wife and I turned at the same time and just stared at each other. I put my hand on my son's shoulder and said, "Let's go see." I opened the closet door in the restroom and opened the shower curtain and told him, "See? There's nothing there." He said, "But I saw it in the corner of my eye every time I passed by, Dad. A shadow." I assured him there was nothing in the restroom. He said okay, smiled, and ran off to play with his brother. I walked back into the kitchen, and my wife looked worried. We shared another long look at each other, but said nothing. We spoke nothing of it and kept on with our chores. I've always had the ability to sense things. It supposedly runs in my family. Well, when I was 10 years old, we moved into a house in the country, and I was really creeped out by it. At the time, when we moved in, it was summer, so school hadn't started yet. I remember playing with my action figures in my bedroom while my dad and stepbrother were moving things in, and having a feeling like someone was watching me. It was a feeling that I couldn't shake. It was especially strong in the bathroom closet to my room, the hallway, and in my parents' bedroom. I also remember, shortly after we moved in, looking through the boxes of the previous family's stuff and stumbling across a family portrait. There was a woman with blonde hair, 2 kids, a boy and a girl about the same age, and a middle-aged man with brown hair. When I looked at it, it gave me a weird feeling. My dad ended up throwing it all out. I quickly developed a fear of being by myself in the house, and of showering, as the bathroom connected to my parents' room was the only one with a shower. If it could be avoided, I used the bathroom near the kitchen, as it didn't give me the weird feeling, but there were the occasions I had to use the other one, since there were 4 people in the house. What began as a weird feeling started to become flat-out anxiety if I had to be in that bathroom or the hall for too long. I distinctly remember that I often got in trouble for sprinting down the hallway, just so I didn't have to be there for too long. Things started to happen the longer we lived there. The door to my parents' room that connected to the bathroom would creak open when I was in there. It would just open all by itself. I grew accustomed to showering with the shower curtains open so I could tell if someone was in the room with me, and often, whilst I was showering, the door would creak open and show my parents' dark bedroom, as I mostly showered at night. It was very creepy. Then school started up, and when I got off the bus, I felt like there were other kids staring at me. Eventually, one of them started talking to me, a boy whose name I don't remember. I was never really a social kid. He started asking me if anything weird had happened to me in my house. I thought it was really strange that he would be asking me this question. The other kids who were sitting close by seemed to be really interested, so I asked him why he'd ask that. He told me that the father of the family who had lived in that house before had shot himself in the head in the back room of the house, my parents' bedroom. He added a few ridiculous details, like the people in the next town over had heard the gunshots, and so on and so forth, trying to scare me even more. The whole day at school, I thought about it. I couldn't shake that feeling that there was a ghost in my house. When I got home that day, I asked my parents about it. My stepmom was immediately angry because she thought that my stepbrother had told me this in order to scare me. They eventually told me the truth, that yes, the man who had lived there before had shot himself in the head in their bedroom, but that there was nothing to worry about, that our house wasn't haunted. Sometime later, my mom got me a cat from my grandmother's farm. She was a black cat, who my mom named Midnight. She made me feel a little bit safer in that house, but I did notice that she always avoided my parents' bedroom, the hall, and the bathroom, choosing to spend most of her time in the living room or in my bedroom, under the bed. She followed me everywhere normally, but refused to go into the bathroom with me. Eventually, I made some friends that lived nearby. One of them, Molly, I became very close friends with. I spent almost every day after school at her house, playing on the trampoline or swimming in the pool. My father didn't allow me to have friends over while no one was home, but one day, Molly and I went to my house while my parents and stepbrother were out, thinking we could play on my Nintendo 64 for a little while before anyone got home. I will never forget what happened. Molly and I walked in through the back door, and we both stood in the hallway for a moment. I felt like I had been doused in cold water, and by the way she was looking at me, I think she felt the same. Both of our eyes were drawn down the hallway to my parents' bedroom door. Slowly, the door creaked open, and the next second we heard a weird, garbled noise, like someone making a long, low moan. Molly and I didn't stick around long enough to investigate. We turned tail and ran out of the house and back to hers. Shortly after all this happened, my parents ended up getting a divorce, and me and my dad moved out of the house. I'm still convinced, to this day, that the house is haunted by that man who shot himself in the head in the back room. I'm a 20-year-old female, but at the time of this I was 17. I went through this phase in my teens where I began to experience sleep paralysis a lot. I mean, that's what it sounds like, although I'm still somewhat convinced it was real. I had a lot of horrifying episodes, but this one was by far the worst. Just to get a point of reference, my bed is a queen size that is against a wall facing south. My bedroom door is on the same wall as my bed, and if you were on the bed, it would be to your left, if that makes sense. Anyway, so I was sleeping one night, and I woke up. I looked at my phone, and it said it was 5:45 a.m. In my mind, I thought, okay, cool, I have a half hour to sleep. I put my phone down and rolled over, my back now facing the door. Just as I was in that drifting off, but not quite asleep stage, I heard 3 knocks on my bedroom door. I thought to myself, why is my brother knocking on my door at 5:45 in the morning? I moaned a grumbly, "What?" or something like that, and didn't hear anything, so I began drifting off again. Suddenly, I felt like something was behind me, near the door into my back. I heard a deep breath release and an icy wave move across my neck. My entire body froze. I couldn't move, and I couldn't talk or scream, or do anything. It was like I was trying to fight something off. I couldn't get the words out, so I just thought it over and over in my head. By the power of Jesus Christ, I command you to leave. Instantly, the sensation was gone. I was still paralyzed with fear, and I jumped up and ripped open my bedroom door. Leaning against my door was my little sister's 3-foot-tall life-sized Barbie doll. When I opened the door, it fell onto my legs, and I nearly shit myself. I spent the rest of the night on the couch. Later that day, I finally got up enough courage to go back into my room. I was looking around, just kind of trying to figure out what had happened, and noticed something. On the outside of the bedroom door, there were 3 long scratches down the center panel. Now, there is no way to be positive, but I am almost certain that they weren't there before. I painted over the scratches, and the church leader came and blessed our house. I haven't experienced anything like that since, and I hope I never do. I'm a 19, nearly 20-year-old girl who lives in the northern Midwest. And unfortunately, I'm a believer of the paranormal through many personal experiences. There have been countless things that have happened to me, but I've narrowed it down to the most terrifying. When I was about 4 years old, my mom and I moved in with my stepdad into this old house in a very small town. I had never been afraid of anything, but even at that young age I remember feeling like something was off the moment I walked in. And besides my fear of the dark, the occasional bump in the night, and the start of some pretty terrible nightmares, nothing really happened in that first year. The first major thing to happen to me was over a year later during Christmas of '01. I had a passion for singing. I loved being in school programs. I always sang the loudest in choir, and I had a really crappy plug-and-play karaoke system. My aunt thought it would be a good idea to get me a cassette recorder for Christmas. She thought that if I could hear myself sing, I'd get better. So you can't even imagine how excited I was once I got the thing. It was the first thing I played with once all my presents were opened. Everything was fine and dandy, until I started playing it back. I wish that the tapes were still intact, because they were fucking terrifying. In an extremely clear, deep voice, I heard a man say, "This is the worst day of my life. I hate them all. I hate them all." I froze in terror, It wasn't my dad or uncle, and it wasn't the TV because they were watching NASCAR. I ran to my mother and aunt, almost in tears, and played it for them. They went white. We popped another tape in, thinking that the first tape was tampered with. We got the same exact message, with the same demonic-sounding voice, only much more angry. Mom took away my recorder after that. She took the tapes too. Side note, I recently found one of them, but someone had taped over it with some radio commercials. I was never comfortable in that house after that, but luckily nothing majorly creepy happened for the next few years. Now flash forward to the summer of 2011. I am convinced my house is haunted, but I'm doing my best to ignore things. I was cleaning my room while I was home alone. I struck a match, lit a candle, and set the candle on top of the metal lid. I turned to put my match in this little cup of water so I wouldn't burn down the house. I maybe was turned around for 3 seconds, and when I turned back the candle was put out and the lid was placed on top of the candle. Naturally, I just noped the fuck out of there and tried to think of an excuse to tell my mom as to why my room didn't get finished. A week later, I was tossing and turning in my bed. It was hotter than hell in my room, which was so strange because even though my room is facing the south, my room is always the coldest in the house. I had just finally conquered my crippling fear of the dark and was sleeping without some form of light for the first time in 11 years of living in that house. The only light was from the street lamp shining through my open windows. I felt uneasy. Something was definitely not right. It felt like someone was staring at me, and I felt like they were angry too. Then it got hotter, and my eyes shot wide open. My heart was racing, as somehow my gaze was being pulled without my control to the foot of my bed. I nearly jumped as soon as I saw it. I saw a pure white face with black eyes and no body staring at me. It held a neutral expression, but I could tell that this was the source of all the negative feelings. At first I thought it was a mask. It swayed up and down a little bit like it was floating, and then it even blinked a few times. I felt like I was forced to look at it for hours, but it was probably less than a minute. Eventually, I fought hard enough to shut my eyes against this invisible force, and when I opened them, it was gone. I bounded up out of bed and flicked on the lights. I was shivering because it was freezing in my room now. My AC was up full blast, and for some reason it was only 50-some degrees that June night. I was terrified, and I began sleeping with many lights on after that. That's when things got worse for me. I would hear someone whispering my name from somewhere in my room, creaking as if someone was going up the stairs when I was the only one home. And don't even get me started about the nightmares, or random bouts of crying and rage. I felt like I was becoming a schizophrenic, to be quite honest, but I knew I wasn't. Most of my nightmares and crying episodes only happened when I was in my house. I went to many summer camps, out with friends, or on long vacations, and while I was away, I never experienced any of those things. So naturally, I started to stay away more. And now looking back, I realized the longer I stayed away, the worse it became when I got back. Let's now skip ahead to April 1st, 2014. I have to lay out a few details before I tell this story. The door to my room is literally at the landing to the top of my stairs. If you trip on the top step, you'd fall most of the way into my room. And they are old as shit. Every single step creaks so loud that it sounds like they're about to give in. My house is generally very creaky, especially the short hallway in between my room and my parents' room, so there is literally nowhere you can step without making a sound. Also, my phone was an S3 Galaxy Mini, so it didn't play music very loud. Another thing to note, I was home alone. My mom was at work, and my dad was in the Twin Cities for a week. I was getting ready for school with my usual routine. I woke up to the alarms on my phone, put my phone on my dresser while it charged, and went downstairs to eat and lock the door after Mom left. It may have been a small town, but there were a few weirdos about, so I like to keep my door locked while I shower. I walked back upstairs and turned on some music on my still charging phone. I left my room for maybe 10 seconds to find a detangler spray my mom borrowed from me. My door was shut, just how I left it, but I was confused because my phone wasn't playing music anymore. I thought maybe YouTube was buffering, but I noticed immediately that my phone was gone. I didn't bring it because, 1, it was charging, and 2, because I was naked, carrying a brush and a hair product, so it's not like I had a free hand, or could put it in my pocket and forget about it. I figured I'd got a call, and the vibration caused it to fall on the floor and under the dresser maybe. I was late to pick up my friend, Faith, for school, because I spent a good 20 minutes tearing my entire house apart looking for it. I drove around the corner to Faith's house, and as soon as she opened the door I began apologizing. "Hey, I'm sorry I'm late. I couldn't find my phone." "Oh, it's okay. Do you want to go back? I think your mom found it." Fear hit me in the gut as hard as a semi-truck doing 80. "Wait, what?" "Yeah, I sent you a text asking where you were, and as soon as you got here, I got a text saying, 'She just left.'" Shivers ran through my body, and I gave a nervous smile and laugh. I tried to play it off as me not being worried, but I was freaked out. My missing phone somehow sent a text to my friend. With all of my doors and windows locked, somehow my phone went missing. Someone correctly guessed my screen lock password that no one except me knows, evaded me through my entire search of my creaky house, and texted my friend saying, "She just left." I looked at her phone, and there it was. She saw me freak out a bit. "Stop messing with me," I laughed again. "April Fool's, right?" "What?" she asked. "I was home alone," I replied, internally screaming. We didn't talk about it much after that. I tried not to think about it, but my stress levels were going through the roof. We told some of our friends about this, and they called and sent messages to my phone, but never got an answer. When I finally came home, my mother was questioning me as to why I left my phone in the dryer next to the entrance door. It was most definitely not there when I left this morning. I explained to her the situation, and I even showed her the text. She thought it was an elaborate April Fool's Day joke, but she soon realized I was being truthful when she saw the fear in my eyes. That was during my senior year of high school. I stayed there over the summer with the creepy things happening more and more frequently. I started going to college in town about 3 hours away. I came home pretty much every weekend, and the whispers, sounds of pacing outside of my room, and shadows passing in front of my lights became more and more frequent. Every time I came home, I had to get majorly messed up before going to bed. I smoked a lot of weed, got really drunk, or took a few sleeping pills to make sure that I didn't care about the spooky stuff going on around me. And that helped stave off some of the fear. I had to be cautious with how I got messed up. I didn't want my parents to find out about my frequent use of intoxicants. Nothing major happened to me for a while after that, but my mom began to notice more and more things. For example, not long after the cell phone incident, my other aunt came to visit us. She's from the South, so I'll call her Southern Aunt. We three sat in the kitchen having drinks and talking about past family gatherings. Eventually we got onto the subject of the tape recorder, and some of the other spooky things that my mom and I have experienced. I began to feel uneasy, so I excused myself and walked up to Faith's room. She and my mother talked about it a bit more, and my Southern Aunt, being the interesting character she is, pulls up this app that's supposed to catch whatever ghosts say. They got some weird response with the name John being repeated and the word knife. But other than that, they didn't get much of a response. So they called my other aunt, the one who was there for the tape recorder Christmas, and told her what they were doing. She then listens in for anything they might miss. Eventually, they got more into the mocking stage, and Southern Aunt said, "If someone or something is out here, turn off the radio." And apparently, the moment she said that, the damn thing turned off. They asked the spirit to turn it back on, and it does. They got so freaked out that they went outside and sat on our backyard patio. I walked over with Faith, and they gushed to us what had just happened. At first I thought they were making fun of me, but after about the 7th time my southern aunt swore to little baby Jesus that it was the truth, I started to believe them. My aunt was on the call with them and also vouched for them, saying she heard the radio go off, and them screaming when it came back on. Now, this semester it seems like every time I've come home something happens to me. For example, one weekend when Faith and I were at my house alone, somehow my phone got through locked doors and windows, past us, and into the garage on top of some boxes that I most certainly did not leave it on. But that's the least disturbing thing that's going on. I was home alone one weekend house sitting. I had taken 2 Dramamine to keep all the fear at bay. This stuff is great because it just knocks me out for several hours. Seriously, I took 2 while on a 13-hour bus ride with my classmates, and apparently I slept through the 2 stops and a car accident right in front of us. Anyway, I made sure all the doors and windows were locked, and then slept in my parents' room because it was the one with the lock on the door, and my dad had a gun in the closet. I locked the door, turned off the bedroom lights, and turned on the tiny lamp that sits next to the headboard. I turned on the TV to some HBO channel so I'd have background noise. I noticed how weird it was because the TV volume seemed to be stuck at low. It clearly said the volume was maxed out, but it sounded like I barely even had it on. I just figured my parents' TV was broken, or maybe the Dramamine was kicking in, and this was just a side effect I had never noticed before. I soon forgot about this, as I quickly began to fall asleep. It was 3:28 when I woke up. I don't know why I remember seeing that time clearly. This was wrong. I was groggy, and my head hurt from being woken up so rudely. The TV was definitely at max volume, and it was so loud it must have been the thing that woke me up. I sat up, lowered the volume, and took in my surroundings. Everything was not as it should have been. All the lights were on, and the once locked door now stood wide open. Drowsiness overtook me, and before I could really freak out, I passed out. I slept until about 1:45. When I woke up, all the lights were off, and the TV was off, and the door was shut. I inspected it, and saw that it was unlocked, but the rest of the doors of my house were locked. I made Faith spend the next night with me. A couple weekends after that, I came back home for a visit. I stayed up late watching Trailer Park Boys with my mom, so I was really tired. But I woke up at around 7, feeling again like something wasn't right. I looked at my window. Daylight was streaming through the slits in my blinds, and again, I saw something that I can't explain. The glass covering my light fixture reflected an image of a silhouette of a tall person standing on the right side of my window. I look at how my drapes are hanging, and then look back at the reflection. It most certainly is not the case of the silhouette. Slowly, I grab my phone and open up Snapchat, but before I switch the camera from front-facing mode to facing my room, I realize how dumb that would be. This is how people die or get jump scared in horror movies. So once again, I noped the fuck out of there. Later, I checked to see if the silhouette was showing in the reflection, and it wasn't. I don't know if I should have been relieved or more frightened. The next time I came home after that was 2 weekends later. It was well past midnight, and I was just starting to drift off, when suddenly a shadow moved across my eyelids. My eyes instantly opened, and I really wished they hadn't. Standing in the center of my room was the same silhouette of a person, either wearing a long dress or a robe. Their shadow was cast over me, my bed, and onto the wall. And me, being extremely stoned, was confused on how to react to this. So I chose to put on some new Game Grump videos and watch those for half an hour. Then the shadow just kind of vanished, and I passed out immediately after telling my boyfriend what had just happened. So, as you guys are probably guessing, I'm not too terribly excited to go home. I don't know exactly what it is that made my house so bad. I mean, when I was about 13 or so, I started dabbling in Ouija boards and paganism, but it was never anything too serious. Plus, I've tried smudging my house with sage, burning dragon's blood, using crystals, and saying blessing prayers, but nothing seems to help. So if you guys have any suggestions, I'd love to know. I only hope that it doesn't hurt my parents. My dad doesn't believe me, and my mom tries to tell herself that there's an explanation, but I just feel like there's been too many instances. It scares me that they are still in that house, but whatever. I'm glad I'll be moving in with my boyfriend soon, so I won't have to stay over there on winter break. I mean, seriously, would you want to go back? If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. If you would like a chance to have your story featured in an upcoming video, make sure you email it to urmaker6260@gmail.com. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I really appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. And don't forget to watch your back, because you never know who or what is watching you.